I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's, hopefully back to a recurring, maybe even monthly. We took a couple of months off, but this is sort of like a council fire where we come together and talk about issues of mutual interest. We'll get into that in a minute, but I'd like to start tonight by taking a moment of silence. If we could maybe, for those who find themselves in harm's way, I think it's appropriate for us to take a moment and get tonight started by thinking about those who are feeling displaced and unsafe. So thank you. Okay, thank you very much. To get us started, I'm going to go through a couple of PowerPoint slides. First off, my name is Luke Jones, and I serve as secretary of a group called the Society of American Indian Government Employees. We started forming this group around 2000, and we incorporated in 2002. I'm a founding member of the organization, and I'm currently serving as board secretary for SAGE. SAGE is happy to be a co-sponsor for tonight's meeting. We focus on core functions to promote the recruitment, retention, development, and advancement of American Indian and Alaska Native government employees and work to ensure their equal treatment under the law. We also work to educate federal agencies in the history and obligations of the federal Indian Trust responsibility and to assist them in its implementation. We also work to assist government agencies in developing and delivering initiatives and programs that honor the unique federal-tribal relationship. And finally, what we're most known for is the provision of an annual national training forum for issues and topics affecting American Indian, Alaska Native government employees. So our motto is honoring our ancestors through government service. This has been a really great cohort, a great community over the course of my 30-year public service career, and I'm honored to serve on the board of SAGE. So I would encourage all of you who are interested to find out more information about SAGE. Our event tonight is hosted by this Tribal Relations Working Group. The Tribal Relations Working Group is an initiative of the American Society for Public Administration, which has a section on intergovernmental administration and management. So it's within the ASPA intergovernmental section where we created the Tribal Relations Work Group back in 2007. And I'm a co-founder for the Tribal Relations Work Group. So the purpose is to increase the effectiveness of intergovernmental administration and management involving American Indian tribal governments, and to help implement innovative government-to-government programs with tribes. Now, you don't have to be a member of the American Society for Public Administration to be part of our circle, part of our council circle here. We had a successful run. Our first current trends talk by Matt Fletcher back in July. And we had our friend Patrick Flanagan from Oregon talking about the programs in Oregon. Our good friend, Professor Berg from Indiana University, featured speaker in September. We had Cabinet Secretary for New Mexico Indian Affairs Department last October, Ms. Monet. And Ms. Megan Bishop from the National Congress of American Indians was our featured speaker for Native American Heritage Month in November. Tad Connor, Associate Professor, New Mexico State. And tonight. So thank you for letting me give that advertisement for the Tribal Relations Work Group. I hope many of you will express an interest and stay in touch with us and join us for future events. Before we get to introducing our speaker tonight, I want to thank John Bartle, President for the American Society for Public Administration, for joining us. If you would take a moment to say hello.
Well, thank you very much, Luke. I'm John Bartle. I'm at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and I'm president of the American Society for Public Administration. Our conference starts on Friday, so like many of you, I'm getting ready to take off tomorrow, but definitely wanted to jump in on this. I'm really glad that, first of all, many of you are here. I know this is going to be a very helpful program tonight, but also I do want to emphasize what Luke has said about the importance of the tribal relations working group within the section of Intergovernmental Administration and Management, or what we call SIAM, which is in turn a section of ASPA, the American Society for Public Administration. ASPA, we believe all relations are important, whether it be government to government, government to tribe, nonprofits, and so on. And I'm proud of where we are. I think we are an international leader. We are the biggest association for public administration, public affairs in the world. And that puts us in a really good position where we are in a strong position, and uh, dialogue is the most important thing for us, whether it be practitioners to academics in Los Angeles, where the conference is, in Hollywood, in the next starting in 2 days. We have a whole bunch of folks from other countries that are coming, and that's very exciting. So ASPA, I've always seen as a crossroads. It's a place where people can meet, get to know each other, exchange information, make connections across boundaries in ways that you wouldn't necessarily make otherwise. Sometimes you can go to a conference where it's all a bunch of people like you, and that's great, and that's important in some cases, but ASPA, it takes you a little bit outside of your comfort zone, and that's deliberate, and I think it's a very important thing to do. I do want to just mention one thing. Luke, you may not know about this, but just starting in January, we created within ASPA a new mechanism for creating groups, basically. We have sections like the section on intergovernmental administration and management, but we also have what we're now calling communities of interest. And these are kind of low barrier, very kind of simple thing. It can just be a group of folks who are interested in something and want to talk about it. So, for example, as SAGE goes forward, as the tribal working group both goes forward, we may find it in their interest in your all's interest to form a community of interest or to form a section. And that's what I think ASPA does well. I think we want to help um, groups of like-minded people find the connections they want to make and make that happen. So that's an option that's out there. Again, I know this goes a little bit beyond what your topic is for tonight, but I did want to mention it just as something to think about. Um, I do look forward to seeing at least some of you in Hollywood for our conference, and I'll stop now. But again, just to thank all of you for coming, and I know it's going to be a great program tonight.
John, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. It means a lot. I know it's a busy time. And then before we get to introduce our speaker, James Christian Blockwood, thank you for joining us, President for the National Academy for Public Administration. Thank you so much for co-sponsoring tonight's event as well. Would you like to come and have a word with us? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And, let me just start by saying how wonderful it is to see this many people for such an important topic. I'm looking at, for me, it is, 8:15 p.m. And I certainly think that this is important and it's something I wanted to learn more about and invest in. And being able to see so many colleagues wanting to do the same is incredible. Let me start by saying I really appreciate the opportunity to co-sponsor this effort. We at the Academy are a congressionally chartered organization, nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we are working every day really hard to help leaders achieve more effective, efficient, accountable, and transparent government. And part of that is working through an intergovernmental system. We believe tribes are essential in government, and they're not just stakeholders or interest groups. They are governments holding a unique sovereign status within the US constitutional system, and they engage across federal agencies and with government to government. Their role in kind of this modern intergovernmental system reflects centuries of law and treaty and policies that recognize tribal self-governance alongside federal, state, and local governments. And understanding how this came to be and how they continue to shape this system is essential to understanding how the larger intergovernmental system works, and not just from a conceptual standpoint, but how it works in reality. And I think this is incredibly important. It's something that the Academy also recognizes and prioritizes. We believe it's central to our work, and we believe that effective policy implementation depends not only on statutory authority, but on institutional relationships, respect for sovereignty, and administrative design. So talking through these type of issues, understanding how the system works, and having respect for each of the different pieces is incredibly important. So let me just end by saying, I commend and recognize Luke Jones for all of his leadership and his work that he's done. Your overview highlighted really the wide range of people you have brought together to learn more about this space. Let me congratulate all of you for being able to take the time and invest in this. Let me just acknowledge that we have our Academy director that leads our Center for Intergovernmental Partnerships, Nancy Augustine, on this meeting. And she plays a real central role to making sure that we're connected to the different parts of government. And let me just also end by saying tonight's talk, which I hope to learn from, it's an opportunity to just not just learn about history, but to deepen our collective understanding of how tribes continue to shape and lead within this intergovernmental system that I described. So again, thank you so much for our opportunity to kind of work with you through this, an incredibly important initiative here. And I look forward to kind of learning more alongside all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So thank you to both John and James for getting us started like that. I really appreciate it. Sam Deloria, are you able to come on camera? I see that I think that you're here in the room with us. Very good. Good to see you, Sam. So I'm going to very briefly introduce Sam. Mr. Deloria is someone who has had a unique vantage point as the country went through a very, very significant change in our approach to tribes. We came out of an era of termination, where the policy of the government was to extinguish the remaining elements of tribal governance capacity and to transition to the era of self-determination brought a range of changes for tribes and the communities around Indian country. and the relationship between tribes, the federal government, tribes, and their state and local government partners. And Sam is somebody who was part of that major transition in policy. So I have benefited so much from Sam's lectures over the years, but really I became familiar with Sam Deloria mostly through the people that he influenced. Sam has influenced hundreds of scholars, people who've gone on to major and minor things. And I'm one of them. And so a lot of the people that influenced me, that I picked as my mentors, learned from Sam. So a lot of the work that we're doing today, Sam has some insight around. This is a council circle, and this is our time to learn from those who have something to teach us. And so with that introduction, I'm going to turn the floor over to Philip Sam Deloria. Thank you.
You got it?
Got it.
Okay. Am I on then? Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. This is weird. Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm about to demonstrate that I am not a scholar. So I have the luxury of not worrying too much about you sitting there saying, we already know all this. We've got the citing articles and all of that. So you may have to hear stuff that you've heard already. That's too bad. You see, I'm trying to decide how to pitch this because there is a story or two stories. And I was going to tell a story and then talk about some other things. And I decided to do it the other way around because some of you may not be familiar with this field and may not know much about tribal government. So when we were doing the work on state tribal relations, we produced at the American Indian Law Center something called a Handbook of State Tribal Relation. We thought whether we were going to call it tribal state or state tribal, so we went both ways. And I encourage you to get in touch with American Indian Law Center, Inc., and see if you can get a copy of it, because I think you may find it interesting. But I'm going to take something out of that to start with, and that is some special circumstances that make tribal governments different from other governments in this system. First is tribes as landowners. On many reservations, the tribe is not only the government, but is a major landowner on the reservation. In some instances, the tribe owns virtually every acre on the reservation. Now, that has certain consequences in terms of how the tribe operates. In the regular American system, the governments, federal and state and municipal, act as at arm's length from the private sector. And naturally, the private sector tries to influence them various ways, above board and not so above board. But these governments tax the private sector, they regulate the private sector, they legislate to do that. And they certainly feel an interest and obligation to have a healthy economy and healthy communities and exercise their powers to do that. When tribes own the land, that creates a different situation because tribes are then simultaneously the owners of the land and participants in the economy to the degree that the land's going to be used for economic purposes. And they are the government that's supposed to supervise that. So it's conflict of interest, and it creates difficult situations sometimes. Just to give you one example that I always use when I talk about this is if you have timber resources, and you've got a sawmill, and your sawmill employs 100 people, and then somebody comes in and says, "Hey, you know what? Here's a brand new sawmill, and the whole thing we can run with 3 guys sitting behind a console, and we won't have to pay all these labor costs." Well, that may be a good decision economically. Politically, I think we can guess that that may not be so popular next time election time comes around. All those people are laid off in order to make more money. Tribes owning the land have to make decisions about how to use it, and mining, environmentally, what they might want to do as governments to protect the environment. Once again, we got to have some money coming in. This is very tempting. Drill those oil wells. I don't need to tell you any more about that. You see what I'm getting. Tribal constituency is somewhat complicated. To varying degrees, the people who live on the reservation are tribal members. Some Indian people who are from other tribes. They're not an enrolled in that tribe. They're married in, or for some reason they live on that reservation. And non-Indian people. Now, their main constituency, of course, is their membership, the voters. They certainly have to see, in a sense, that the non-Indian people, the non-member people, Indian and non-Indian, are a part of their constituency, because these people have political contacts someplace else, and if they're not treated right, they're sure going to let those people know. So the tribe, in making their policies, has to keep in mind, now, how's this going to hit the non-members who are living here as well as the members? So that's another thing. Also, tribal citizenship or membership is not like the states. I live in New Mexico. I used to live in South Dakota. I'm a citizen of New Mexico. I can't say I'm a citizen of South Dakota anymore. So, but I'm a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. I've never lived there. I guess if they're going to amend their constitution, I get to vote on it. Otherwise, I have no say in what they do. So you see, that's different from being a citizen of the local tribe. Okay, next thing that complicates tribal governance is poverty. A disproportionate share of the people that the tribe governs are poor people. Other governments balance out various interests. You hope they help poor people, and when they can, but they have other things to take care of, other things to look at. With a disproportionate number of poor people, that tilts the table a little bit. Tribes also have a special obligation, or feel a special obligation, with regard to Indian cultures, the culture of the people of the reservation. Now, I think we recognize that every government has a responsibility to the culture of the society that it governs. Obviously, or it wouldn't exist. They have education to raise good citizens. They have all kinds of things that they do. that have an impact on the culture. The difference in the case of tribes is their culture is constantly under pressure. The pressure of the couple hundred years of assimilation, trying to assimilate. And that kind of pressure makes them very aware that every decision they make, every decision they're faced with, could have dire consequences to the culture, the integrity of that society. So it once again gives them their policy making a special slant. And the final one is federal tribal relations. Our relationship with the federal government, because of the so-called trust responsibility, is complicated. It's governed by federal policy. As I used to say to law students that I was preparing to go to school, when you read all the Supreme Court opinions that we liked back when we used to win in the Supreme Court, you think, oh boy, we're really all set up. And I tell them, one bad day in Washington, and they can wipe out everything but our property rights. They can wipe out recognition of our sovereignty. They can wipe out the whole system. And it kind of look like that's pretty far-fetched. Well, read the papers. It ain't so far-fetched anymore. So that is another thing that makes policymaking more intense in that area. Final thing then is federal tribal relations. And here I'm going to stick my toe in the water here on very much in your field, and that is the whole phenomenon. I'll call it a phenomenon right now. We've had recognition of tribal self-governance for a very long time. For much of that time, that was pretty much in name only. Even in, we came up, as you said, to the Indian Reorganization Act in 1934 that allowed tribes to recognize tribal governments pretty much along the non-Indian fashion with legislatures and all of that. But it was a real sincere attempt to give tribes the opportunity to create a vehicle to govern themselves. Throughout most of that period, however, the Bureau of Indian Affairs really was the municipal government. They provided services in the community. They were not shy about suggesting to tribal governments what they should do legislatively, almost to the point of tribal government being the rubber stamp for whatever the Bureau wanted them to do. And then in the 50s, of course, the Indian Health Service was split off from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But for most of that time, the only game in town was BIA and IHS. That's where, if you're going to get any money from the outside, that's where you're going to get it. And as I said, there's never been a time when whoever the Indian agency was, whether it was a War Department or the Indian Office, Indian Service, or BIA, there's never been a time when they were the only federal agency involved. Treasury, Justice, during the treaty period, State Department, they all had a piece of the action, but it was fairly limited. And then, here it is, 1962, some influential tribal attorney convinced HUD, the Public Housing Administration, to recognize tribally chartered housing authorities and apply for and receive HUD money to build housing projects. Now that was a bombshell. People didn't realize in the terms we're talking about today how important that was. First, it was a federal agency recognizing tribal governments in a practical way. Second, they were recognizing the public agencies that tribes created so they could give money. This is huge. This is huge. And so but nothing much happened after that. Then in 64, Economic Opportunity Act passed, and the principal program in OEO was the Community Action Program. The Community Action Program was a very broad-based, with a cap grant, you could do anything except construction. Anything that was related to the solution to problems of poverty. Now, let me step aside for a minute to tell you a little anecdote. Even though you couldn't do construction, there was a legendary tribal chairman on the Red Lake Reservation named Roger Jourdain.
Roger Jourdain, 1937 to 2022, was the first tribal chairman of Red Lake Nation, a position he entered in 1959 and held for 31 years. Jourdain is credited with protecting Red Lake's extensive tribal sovereignty and improving tribal infrastructure during his tenure in office.
And Roger Jourdain submitted a proposal to train his members in the building trades. And so they traded it, set their curriculum and everything like that. And what nobody seemed to notice is the training materials amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And as each session came to an end, by golly, that's a house, I'll be damned. And then pretty soon you get these results of their training, and it sure looked like houses for people. But so the ingenuity of tribal chairman never ends. Okay, so you had Community Action Program. They had what they called an Indian desk. They set aside money from the basic Community Action Program appropriation, set aside that to fund tribes. And the Indian desk was a self-contained unit within Community Action Program. Wildly popular and successful. Tribes loved it, and tribes having that Indian desk then started looking at other federal agencies and saying, why don't you have an Indian desk? You should have one. This is really great. So there's gradually started to be Indian desks. And we were pretty happy with that. And then the Nixon administration had an initiative, I don't think they called them initiatives in those days, to allow federal domestic assistance programs or all federal programs to become more responsive to different regional needs by decentralizing and putting a lot of power in the regional offices. The FAR report, they called it, Federal Assistance Review. And those of you who are scholars, I suggest you dig it out because it's an interesting piece of history. Well, then the question comes up, what's going to happen to these Indian desks? And the Office of Management and Budget, which we think of mostly in terms of budget, they have a management side that look at how things should be managed. And they assigned a wonderful guy by the name of Sidney Freeman. And he was supposed to write the report on how this initiative was going to affect Indian desks. And he wrote a report saying, I don't see how Indian desks can survive because of this. I happened to be at a meeting where I heard somebody from the administration presenting this to the National Tribal Chairmen's Association board. And he said, now this is what we plan to do. We're going to abolish the Indian desks. And these guys didn't like it. They said, you've got us out there in the regions. States are going to be really strong in those regions because that's what you're sending them out there for, is to make it more responsive to the states. What's going to happen to us? Well, they argued about that. And this guy, Bob Robertson, said, well, my obligation is to consult you, and I've consulted you. I've heard what you had to say, and we're going to do it anyway. And I thought, I can't tell you what I thought because it would be bad language, but let's say I disagreed. So I thought, I'm going to find out what the heck this is all about. And I found this Sid Freeman guy, and I said, this is an outrage, and we fought. And it turns out the guy is a bureaucrat in the finest sense of the word. I have rarely met a kinder, more competent, generous person in my life. Not to say all you bureaucrats are that way, but this is the model. This is the model. Sid and I went on a tour of the country, Lincoln and Douglas, arguing this. And then at night, he would, we'd sit there over a steak and a couple of glasses of good bourbon, and he would send me to school. And the very first thing he said is, you got to understand how this system works. OEO administers one piece of legislation. And they have one program, center piece of that legislation, community action program. It's easy to set up an Indian desk there. Set aside, go ahead, do it. Now let's go over to HUD and look in the federal catalog, and HUD's probably got 150 programs that they administer. How are you going to set up an Indian desk over there? Well, I don't know. Said every one of these domestic assistance programs is too complicated. An Indian desk on the model you're talking about is not possible. I started thinking in those ways. But he said that there are things that you need to look at, though. He said, OMB circular such and such, whatever it is, regulations on how federal grantees and contractors are supposed to report their program back to OMB. And they said we've got different categories, different parts of it. And there's one for state and local government. And there's one for nonprofits. And guess where they got you guys? Nonprofits. Whoa, that can't be. And so we fought that. We got them to change it. But that got me to thinking about a lot of things. But one of the things I came out of that with is this Bureau of Indian Affairs is a strange creature. What did they used to say? A camel is a beast designed by a committee, or an elephant or something. All these other agencies are vertically defined. You got health, education, welfare, natural resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Health Service are designed for a constituency, for a relationship with societies and government. And so there is seemingly duplication or overlap. You have Indians plus something in somebody's vertical category, Indians plus education, Indians plus health, Indians plus land management. And all that is in one place. So what do you do as a public administrator if you have this problem? When you have a special target that is horizontal in nature, you want to be sure that civil rights is another one, but it's the analogy isn't all that great. What do you do when this topic affects every federal agency? And the essence of the trust responsibility is the federal government, not the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So that means, in some sense, anything the federal government does, any federal agency does that affects Indian tribes is subject to the trust responsibility.
Right.
Okay, so what do you do when you do that? Do you concentrate them all in one place and not worry about these other agencies? Well, then they're going to be fighting the other agencies, right? And anything that comes up, if they go to HUD and say, we want some of your money, well, you got the Bureau of Indian Affairs over there. We don't have to give you any money. Some not too thoughtful person once decided the conflict of interest could be resolved when in court, in legal situation, where the United States has to represent the public interest and the Indian interest at the same time, and when they're in conflict, what do you do? So they're going to create the Trust Council Authority, which was going to be a bunch of lawyers over in Virginia someplace, and they're going to represent the Indians. So every time you have a meeting to decide the federal government's position in litigation against Indians, or that's supposed to be helping Indians, and somebody says, what about the Indians? What are they going to say? Oh, they got their lawyers across the river. We don't need to worry about them. That you pay the price of isolation. You are isolated and everybody else shuns you. So, and during this period, there was always a battle. The Bureau of Indian Affairs shouldn't be an interior because that's land-based, and these are all social problems, poverty and all that. And there you stick. HEW is a people agency. It should be over there. Well, every argument for moving that being an interior was a disadvantage and being in HEW was an advantage. Once you moved HEW over there, you put a minus sign in front of the ones over here, and you make the same arguments of why it belongs in interior, that this trust land. See, so there is no one place this agency should be. And yet, if it becomes an independent agency, they're isolated. So it's an incredibly complex way of trying to disperse responsibility and disperse functions and still be able to have the expertise of a single agency. So that's something to keep in mind when we talk about this other stuff then as it's coming up. Okay. So Sid Freeman talked me out of that. And then the next thing is that one of Sid's colleagues, a guy named Bob Garlock, may he rest in peace. Bob Garlock did a study under the auspices of the National Council of Indian Opportunity, which was something Nixon created. It was supposed to be all the cabinet secretaries that dealt with Indians, chaired by the vice president. They were supposed to look up Indian issue. So they got Bob Garlock to do a study of tribal participation in the federal domestic assistance program. Now, somebody should dig that out and look at that. I don't know where it is, but I'm sure somebody find it where the papers of NCIO are housed and look at that. That's another history thing. Bob Garlock found that out of more than 100,000 programs in the federal domestic assistance program catalog, that's a little misleading because not all of those were the kind of grants and contracts we're talking about. Some of them were direct services, but it's still in the hundreds. Out of all of those programs, only, and I don't remember the numbers, that's why if you dig it out, send me a copy of it. Only fewer than 30 served at least one Indian tribe out of, in those days, probably 450, 500 tribes. Only 30. How many served more than one tribe? Probably between 10 and 15. So that kind of hair raising. And we did a study, the American Indian Law Center. We got some recent law graduates, and they read every authorizing statute for every federal program to see if the provisions regarding eligibility could be read to include Indian tribal governments or not. Sometimes it was, if it said departments of education, hey, create a Department of Education and get in line. If it said state departments of education, we don't want to be considered a state. So it's that simple. And then the next move, once again, this coordination business, the next move was going to be to get somebody, ideally it would be OMB, but it could be the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. It could be anybody in the government or outside the government to be included every time a new program was being authorized or every time an existing program was being amended, to look and see the impact on tribal governments and to see if the language can be written in the right way that is most acceptable to the government and most and acceptable to the tribes as well. So we won that one. We won that one and tribes started, okay, you see what you got to do. We got to go find this and get you in on this. And so they started participation in especially the Great Society program and did pretty well. And once they got these programs in the same kind of ingenuity Jourdain used, you know, if you look at these federal domestic assistance programs, they're ornaments for state and local governments. They already have a delivery system that they fund the nucleus of. And then the feds come along and they say, we're going to give you program money that will supplement the money you're putting into this area. Yeah, sure, why not? So that enriched state and local government in their existing delivery system. Tribes didn't have agencies. They didn't have executive branch agencies because they had nothing to do. They didn't have any money. And so tribes took the grant money from these, I mean, they didn't take the money. They got the grant money, and out of those grant monies from these domestic assistance agencies, they created an executive branch of government. And virtually every tribe, their today's structure dates back to those days. It's a remarkable bit of ingenuity on their part, and fortunate that they were able to get that money from the feds. Also, another feature of these domestic assistance programs is very often they are created because what the feds want the states to do, they seem to lack the constitutional power to just override them and say you have to do this. My favorite example is some of you young folks will remember back when the federal government wanted everybody to have 55-mile speed limit. And they didn't have the power to force the states to have 55-mile speed limit. But they did have the power to say, if you want highway funds, you're going to have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. So a lot of these programs like EPA and all of that, companion with the money was a recognition of regulatory power. And so tribes had to fight like hell to get into EPA because they weren't in the initial legislation and then this and that. And so they had to fight, but eventually and gradually, their power to regulate the environmental impact was recognized legislatively or administratively and then funded by these programs. So what does that mean? What that means is suddenly the old kinds of disputes between state and municipal and tribal governments have blossomed because now tribes are competitors as governments on the reservation and affecting nearby places. Suddenly, tribes are at the table and they're doing something, and the states have to account for that in a way they never had to do before. So that caused some friction, but it just created a milieu, if I can, of intergovernmental relations, often turbulent, sometimes not so turbulent, between tribal, state, and municipal governments. And so that kind of thing started to grow. Exacerbating that is then land claim, the famous Maine land claims. Well, there were land claims springing up all over the country that were threatened to disrupt non-Indians' expectations of their what kind of land, what kind of rights they had, what kind of power they had. And during the Nixon administration, there was quite a bit of administrative settlements of boundary disputes or return of land that was taken wrongly. And so tribes were suddenly getting land back, and that created other issues. And so there was a growing, what we call backlash. The states were, 7 o'clock, my timekeeper over here, it's his problem. He can pull a plug on me if he wants to. The states were getting grumpy about this. And so they started organizing. And at some famous NCAI meeting in Salt Lake City, Frank Ducheneau, who was an Indian guy who staffed the Indian subcommittee of House Interior, came out and he said, this isn't going to be a good session of Congress for us because there's legislation being introduced that is going to be way, way, way beyond what makes sense. It's going to affect treaty rights, it's going to affect water rights and everything. So Chuck Trimble, my brother Chuck Trimble, who was president of the executive director of the National Congress of American Indians, he and I went around the country separately talking to anybody who talked to us about these issues. And one of the high points for me was talking to a group in the state of Montana. And there's a guy there, when I talked about improving the relationship, he called me Goebbels. He said, the big lie. This guy's telling you the big lie. Well, okay. But because of that backlash, it put everybody off. And one of the organizations that wanted to do the right thing was an organization called the National Conference of State Legislatures. And they set up a committee of legislators chaired by a wonderful guy by the name of, ask you what's the guy's name? Anyway, I didn't remember. How old? I don't remember. Ed Manning, thank you. Ed Manning went around and had their meetings around the country. And as it happens, they were going to meet in Albuquerque. And they were going to address whether to recommend that NCSL support this legislation. Two major bills. They called them Meads-Cunningham. Lloyd Meads from Washington State, who used to be on our side, but he switched. And a guy named Glenn Cunningham, there was a famous guy, different guy. These were bad pieces of legislation. So NCAI asked me to go to that meeting. And I went and was greeted at the door by the woman who was staffing the meeting for NCSL, staff member by the name of Tassie Hanna, who's here with her lovely husband, Jason, my dear friends. And Tassie welcomed me, and we made our pitches. The guy made his pitch, state government, this and that. And so it was my turn to talk. And I said, well, if you support this, you're forcing us to go around the country calling you a bunch of racists. So we don't want to do that, but we don't have any choice. But also, Chuck and I have found in going around the country, when we go to your meetings, we find that you think we're the most powerful lobby in Washington. When we go to our meetings, we think that you're the most powerful lobby in Washington. And you interpret this intergovernmental relationship in terms of how can we get a court or the Congress to resolve all these issues in our favor and kick the other guys off the reservation. So I said, first, that if you each think the other guy is powerful, that's a chance for political arbitrage. I can come in and play you off against each other. But also, you are forgetting that you could not have livable life on the Indian reservation without some level of cooperation between the governments, state, municipal, and tribal. If you got a prairie fire, the first thing you do is not to dig out a plot map to see who has to put the fire out on these acres and who has to put it out over there. You put it out. Then you come back later on, maybe you want to argue about it costs us, pay us some money, whatever it is. Think of all the things that you do. We have had cross-deputization for 100 years. We have tax collection agreements that nobody made you do. The state, you couldn't collect sales tax on the Indians and storekeepers wouldn't collect sales tax on the Indian people on the reservation. And it's a headache for them. Are you Indian? Do I pay your tax? Well, hell, everybody's an Indian then because they don't want to pay the tax. And so what they did was they had a tax collection agreement. The tribe would not resist everybody paying the tax, and then a formula rebate to the tribe of how much Indians paid, and then the tribe would put. Essentially, it's a bank shot tribal tax, and all kinds of things like that. I said, you guys got this all over the place. Well, what should we do? So go talk to the tribes, talk to the National Congress of American Indians and their tribal chairman, and say we want to talk. Let's just start with the things where we agree and work towards the areas where we don't agree. And you'll find also on a lot of these issues, you can make agreements on how we're going to handle this, and we're not going to definitively resolve it until we have to. In the meantime, as long as we can avoid definitive resolution, we can work together and get these jobs done. And I said, it's like when you live in an old part of town and there's no hedge between you and your neighbor. You mow up to a certain point and he mows up to a certain point, and you meet. Now, if you had to know exactly where the line is, you call a surveyor in and he says, here's the line. As long as you don't have to know, who cares? Doesn't matter. That's what this is like. Let's just govern the best we can by talking to each other. And if we have to define it, that's what courts are for. That's what Congress is for. But don't think they're going to solve every damn little dispute you've got. So I went home. Tassie called me on Monday. Well, what happened? Well, they bought your pitch. Oh, good. Now they want to know when you can deliver the tribes. I said, damn it, I told them I was only talking to myself. You know how much trouble I'm going to give? They're going to think that I'm out there making offers on their behalf. Well, as it turned out, that wasn't the case. They readily embraced it. NTCA meeting, it doesn't exist anymore. The guy, about as Indian as he could be, come up with feather and beadwork and everything. And I thought, oh man, he's going to kill me. He got up and I thought, the first guy to talk here is going to determine what these guys say. They're going to get mad at me or what? And he said, we've been negotiating water rights with the state of Montana for 10 years. We finally came up with a solution and it's going to be ratified by Congress. I think it's a hell of a good idea. Boy. So that's how we got started with this Commission on State-Tribal Relations. We had AGs, we had a governor. The Governors Association was too snooty. They said, we don't participate in activities with these lesser forms of government. Oh, excuse me. We had AGs, we had governors, we had legislators, and we had to have the counties. Absolutely had to have the counties. Because I said to the state people, you think about Indians once a week. These people have to deal with us every day. They know more. They know more. And they also know the practicalities. They see what's happening in the community and they work things out on their way. So that is really how, through working various ways, tribes got in on the domestic assistance thing, which helped them have executive branches of government. And that's how they got pushed as a political tactic into institutionalizing state-tribal relations. And what many people don't understand is, because of their preoccupation with the federal role in Indian people's lives, they think, there's some people have said states and tribes can't talk without the federal government being there. Where does it say that? Don't say that anyplace. And people also raised the issue of tribes could make a bad deal. Well, tribes could make a bad deal when they buy an automobile. What the hell? So what? That's called self-government. But the things they're most concerned about, federal law protects them. They cannot give up jurisdiction, formal jurisdiction to the state without a referendum of the people. That's federal law. They cannot burden their property without, that's what trust property is you don't have complete control of it. If they're not risking their property and they're not risking their government or power, what do they got to lose? That means that tribes, states, and counties get the message across, can make, it says, should states and tribes make agreements? Yes, but it is possible for them to come up with an agreement that is not legal under federal law, under state law, under tribal law. Then that's the one you can't make. But what's so hard to understand about that? You obviously have to see if you have the power to make this agreement. Beyond that, there's a total open end as to what state-tribal relations, what vehicles they need to use. That's completely up to them. It doesn't need to be formal. It can be if you want it to be. It doesn't need to have a term. It does blah, 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 unless that's inherently required by what it is you try to do. There. So that's where we are. Questions?
Wow.
Complaints? That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Well, you covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much for that story. I do want to say that the link to the Tribal Relations Working Group page that we put at the very top of the thread tonight, it does have a link to the document. So we already have a link to this document as one of our reference materials that's linked on that page. So thank you so much for that. Do we have immediate questions from folks in the attendees? Feel free to raise your hand and be recognized.
I have a question.
Eric, what do you got?
Sam, I was going to ask you about in over the years, I've really took, particularly when I was tribal attorney at Cheyenne River, what you and Clinton and I kind of blended all of that together to come up with ways to be innovative and work on things on the res. But right now I'm working since McGirt and the governor Stitt, who amazingly declares himself Cherokee, is working completely against the tribes there. When you're, I mean, this is kind of a weird, one of the weirdest scenarios I think I would have ever imagined, other than the horror of the Dawes Commission and everything before that. But what are your thoughts on how to, going back through the worst of the 50s and termination era and terminating tribes? What are your thoughts on how to deal with that in our modern context?
Thanks. That's a great, I hate it when people say that's a great question. It's sort of condescending. Thank you for the question. Because I was going to mention this. When we were doing this was a very different climate of politics in the country. It wasn't as divided and it wasn't as nasty as it is now. But also, well, anyway, things have changed. And the atmosphere of being open to working across the aisle, as they say, it'd be hard to revive that. However, I think one of the things it's important to do is for you to be thinking of not approaching a politician with the do this because it's right or do this because whatever. It's do this because it's in the interest of your government. One of the things that we did that when we did this tribal state stuff is I said to Cassie, make sure when you folks at NCSL are selecting representatives to serve on this commission, don't send me any Indian legislators, because it puts them in a conflict of interest and a conflict of emotions. Whose side am I going to be on? Whatever. And don't send me some liberal that loves us more than we love ourselves. I want your hardest cases. I want the people who are going to stand up there and represent state government. I don't mean mean, but I mean dedicated people who are working for the interests of the state. And by golly, we got one, a wonderful man by the name of Carol Graham, senator from Montana. And he teased me all the time we worked together. And at our last meeting, he said something that always chokes me up. When I tell this, he came up and he said, you know, Sam, I've been teasing you, trying to get you on our side all this time, and I never could do it. He said, well, one thing I got to say is you treated us fair. He said, you let us have our say. And I said, well, Senator, wouldn't have worked otherwise. Because we, you know, a lot of times they go to these meetings and the whole meeting is about how wonderful Indians are and how bad white people are. Well, how the hell are you going to get anything done then? So I think the thing is, there is nothing wrong. Not only is there nothing wrong with representing the best interest of the government you represent, that's what you're supposed to do. But that also includes sometimes compromise. Hey, if we work with these guys, here's what we'll get out of it. And I think that's what you have to look at, is opportunities where you can approach, I wouldn't mess with the governor. I'd go to the agencies themselves to the degree that you can, and try to think of ways that you can relate to them that is possible given the present circumstances, political and every other way, in the state of Oklahoma at that time. Okay, this is a bad time for us holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but is there anything that we can work together on? Is there anything, something as simple as when you have a training program for your people, can you invite our staff to go through the same training you do? We'll pay for it. That little things like that. Any little thing that we had a meeting one time that started out, it was about regulating fish and game. And when they came into the meeting, the people from the states were all pure scientists. We regulate the game according to the strictest scientific principles. And the Indians were all pure Indians. We apologize to the game when we kill them, all that stuff. By the end of the meeting, they were brothers. They were brother bureaucrats, and they realized they had more in common with each other as people who were trying to regulate these resources than they had that divided them. And the biggest nuisance to them was not each other, but was politicians and the general public. Those are the people that made their lives hard. I remember one guy was complaining about the Utes not respecting their scientific bag limits or whatever the hell it was. And I said, I got a question for you. How do the antelope know where the New Mexico border is? And he looked at me and he said, funny you asked that question. He said, we have more damn trouble with the state of New Mexico than we do with the Utes. And I said, well, then what the hell are you complaining about? It's just another complication in your administration. And another one, I asked him, I said, you're talking about these bag limits that you set scientifically. I said, have you always used scientific methods? He said, no, not really. And I said, what did you use? What was your system before you used pure science? And he said, we call it Sally. And I said, what does that mean? He said, same as last year. That's how they set their bag limit, same as last year. So to your question, you got to see what's possible, and don't assume that nothing is possible just because some of the avenues you might otherwise have enjoyed in another era are cut off to you. That doesn't mean the whole system is cut off. That's my answer.
Thank you, sir.
We've got a couple more questions. Sam, I'm going to give you two from the chat. The first one is Nixon credited as the first to really start tribal consultation concept. What are your thoughts about the origins of that and the connection to Nixon? And then we've got another one in the chat after that.
Well, I got to be a hero to some of these Nixon guys because I went to a meeting and I said he was, for all his fault, he was the best president for Indians probably since Roosevelt, because he had good people working for him, and they had pretty good approaches. I wouldn't say that he was he didn't invent consultation, but as the guy said, in fact, it was his guy that came out and said we had to consult you, but you've got to understand consultation means consultation. It doesn't mean veto power. But generally, I think they were pretty good. And I think Indian people understand that what we want from these federal agencies is not to win every battle, but to have every battle, to have a chance to have our say and to have it recognized. Nixon did a lot of good things. That didn't happen to be one of them. He definitively said termination is over, self-determination is starting, and that, was in some of his stuff. But yeah, he deserved a lot of credit, to be sure. But Johnson, Johnson had a good policy. He had good words in his policy, and they were trying to do it. Oh, the other thing that's important is because of the Community Action Program grants and other programs administered by tribes, Congress started feeling the pressure of having the Bureau of Indian Affairs still out there on the reservation running all the program. And so the result of that is some little piece of paper called the Indian Self-Determination Act that enabled tribes to contract to run any service, with the exception of trust protection, because that's the essence of the trust responsibility. But otherwise, they could contract just about anything. And that was a huge change, with essentially Bureau getting on the bandwagon of the Great Society and having the tribes do that. That was a very, very, very important thing. A lot of power and a lot of money came with that. Somebody sent a question, a student. What was the question? What can they do as a student to encourage this?
Yes, sir. What advice might you have for young folks wanting to strengthen the government-to-government relationship with Indian nations? I'm a non-native and recently began law school after 5 years working on staff at Michigan legislature. My hope is to be a good partner after graduation.
Of course, it depends on where you're working, but whoever you're working for, just kind of try to think of some of these things that I have, in my inadequate way, tried to explain about recognizing legitimate interests. And too much of when people get to meetings, they tend to talk in formulas. They talk in formulas about how bad some agencies, how Indians always lose. We don't always lose. I've heard somebody wrote a thing saying we always lose in court. No, we don't always lose in court. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. That kind of reductionism is not helpful. Having insight wherever you're working, having insight into the complexities of these problems, and recognizing that whoever you're working for has an interest, but so does the other guy. If you're going to be a good lawyer, it's just okay. If you're going to be a good lawyer, and you and your colleagues prepare for a lawsuit or a negotiation or something in the same way you conduct yourself as an advocate, that all the right is on your side and the other guy's an idiot for even filing a brief, the mistake you're going to make is you're not going to recognize the strength of that guy's case. If he's the bad guy and you're the good guy and there's nothing good about him, then you are missing this whole dimension, and you're gonna pay the price for it. So I would say to young people, whoever you're working for, just recognize that other guy is entitled to pursue their self-interest as you are pursuing your client's self-interests. And it's a matter of being hard-headed about it and steadfast, but also recognize you're not going to get everything you want. Don't pout about it. Don't say no fair. Grown up, be grown-ups. Be grown-ups. This other one, MPA. What's that? Some guy's asking a question about the MPA. Alan Parker set up a program up in Evergreen for tribal masters in public administration in tribal administration. And it was a really good program. He used to have me up to talk once a year, once a semester, one of these weekend programs. I really loved that program. Another story. It was wonderful to hear your folks from the society and from the academy welcome us, and especially the academy, how open they are and how excited they are. One of the things that Sid told me is once they got into this, he and Bob, they got really interested in Indian stuff. And Sid said, I went over to the Academy of Public Administration and I said, hey, we're going to be doing this. You guys want a part of it? You want to know about it? And the guy said, no. He said, we don't recognize tribes as real governments. There's a professional attitude. Who said you got to decide who the real governments were? So things have changed a lot since those days. But I have to say, as much as Evergreen welcomed the program and nurtured the program, their faculty had me to lunch, and there was resistance, there was skepticism. And finally, I said, you guys, you think that you're supposed to be teaching these people, preparing them to be public officials, public servants in the state of Washington. And you go any place in Western Washington, and you can't swing a dead cat without knowing about the conflicts between tribal and state and local government. And you're telling me that you're not going to talk about this in your classes? This should be as much a part of your curriculum. I don't mean devote the whole curriculum to it, but I mean, how can you talk about it as, oh, today's the day for Indians. Indian. Okay, enough of that. Got to be integrated into the whole thing. You can't look at the system of government in Washington state without seeing all those tribes in the West especially. The rules of the game, the rules of your profession are, you got to tell the truth, whether you like it or not. You got to look at things as they are, whether you like it or not. So I'm delighted to hear what your leadership is doing now, and I believe absolutely that they believe what they're saying. And so that's great. I think in these terms, in terms of the profession, your profession, I'm very encouraged to hear this. So there you go.
Thank you.
All right.
We are at the time, and I want to invite everybody that's still with us. If you want to come on camera, feel free to do so. Sam, there's a lot of folks that joined us tonight who are former students or otherwise alumni from the programs that you helped establish in New Mexico. And so there's a lot of folks who see you and recognize the contributions that you've made to positive outcomes for our communities.
Well, thank you.
Your work has
Thank
really
you.
affected.
I'm proud to be associated with almost all of them. I don't mean the people who showed up tonight, but there's a couple embarrassed me. And let me say again, if I didn't say it before, this state tribal stuff and the commission and those things would not have been possible without Tassie Hammond. Talk about bureaucrat in the best sense of the word. She's not a bureaucrat, but she made this work. She made it. She's the one that made it work, and I don't like being given credit for stuff when she did the work. She did the damn work. But anyway, Tassie, thank you again. I always like to thank you. Okay, thank you for inviting me, and we'll do this again next time or whatever. Anyway, good.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
You bet.
Go in peace, everyone.
So good to see you, Sam.
Philip Sam Deloria is a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and is one of the most influential figures in modern federal Indian policy, tribal self-governance, and the art of applying theory to practice when protecting the rights of American Indian tribes and their citizens. He is generally credited for promoting tribal-state intergovernmental collaboration as an expression of tribal self-governance and self-determination. Sam graduated from Yale in 1964 and attended Yale Law School from 1968 to 1971. He received the first Henry Rowe Cloud Medal, the first Native American Yale graduate, 1910, in recognition of Sam's contributions to the community, state, and nation. For 35 years, he served as director of the American Indian Law Center, AILC, the oldest, most influential Indian-managed and Indian-controlled legal and public policy organization in the country, hosted at the University of New Mexico. In 1978, Deloria helped establish the Commission on State-Tribal Relations, CSTR, the first organized national attempt to study the state-tribal relationship. The principles it developed remain relevant to intergovernmental systems management today. He was also the founder and the first Secretary General of the World Council of Indigenous Peoples, helping lay a foundation for the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and helped develop the first Tribal Masters in Public Administration, MPA, program at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, where students specialize in tribal state relations and issues of relevance to governance, management, and leadership.